kind heart, a brilliant mind, and a penchant for communication and knowledge. He just did his book tour in Montreal, and now he's here. His presentation is called Groupthink. Please give a warm welcome to my son, Alex Evans.
Thank you for the heartfelt introduction. It makes me feel so welcome. As Chris mentioned, I am doing my presentation today on groupthink. Now, before I really get into it, I want to show you something. It's quite famous, actually, and I think it really drives my point home. We will wait for the internet to do its thing, but if not, I will search it for you all. But I think this comes from a famous play, and also which they've turned into 2 movies, called 12 Angry Men. I don't know if you know the movie, but the premise is quite simple. There are 12 jurors, and they are deciding the fate of one boy who has allegedly committed a murder. And the scene that we're going to see comes from the first vote. Now, I hope you all enjoy this.
Okay, gentlemen, if I can have your attention. You fellas can handle this thing any way that you want to. I'm not going to make any rules. We can, well, discuss it first and then vote on it. That's, of course, that's one way. And, well, we can vote on it right now. I think it's customary to take a preliminary vote.
Yeah, let's go. Well, then we all get out of here, huh?
Uh-huh. Okay, then I think that, of course, you know that we have a first-degree murder charge here, and if we vote the accused guilty, we've got to send him to the chair. That's mandatory. I think we know that. Yeah, let's see your square. Okay, anyone doesn't want to vote?
I would think.
Okay, then just remember that this has to be 12-0 either way. That's the law. Okay, are we ready? All those voting guilty, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, that's 11 guilty. Those voting not guilty? 1. Right. 11 guilty, 1 not guilty. Well, now we know where we are. Oh,
Yes. So, that really exemplifies groupthink. And I'll explain that a little later on, but keep that in mind. Keep that clip in mind. Yeah, when you didn't miss much, you just missed like 10 seconds of the clip. No big deal. You got the major point, was the vote. So really, what is groupthink? Now, I could give you a textbook definition, but I think I'm going to give you a definition from the guy who first came up with the term, Irving Janis, who did this in 1983. And he said, groupthink is a deterioration of mental efficiency, reality testing, and moral judgment that results from in-group pressure. Basically, he thinks that way, so he's going to think that way, so she's going to think that way, so he's going to think that way. It's really complicated, but also simple at the same time. And I guess the long and short of it in a basic layman's term is people tend to agree with each other when they all have either similar mindset or a high-stress environment. So, where do we find groupthink specifically? Well, high-stress environments, like I mentioned before. It's when there's a lot of stress, when the decision really matters, people tend to just go with the first thing that's thrown out there to get the pressure off of them. We also find it in groups with opinionated leaders, people who are very, very strong-willed and won't take no for an answer, so to speak. You've probably all been in a group such as that. I mean, how many people have been in a group where the leaders seem to be like, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how it's going to be done? Yeah, that's a very good example of groupthink. I call them sheep groups. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Sheep groups are basically where everybody thinks the same way. There is no difference of opinion, there is no difference in personality. Everybody has the same sort of idea, so naturally everybody's going to agree with each other without sort of questioning things. And finally, cultures that emphasize sameness, or we might know them as high-context cultures, where saving face is a very, very big thing. And that's not necessarily groupthink, but it is cultural, so it can be considered groupthink. because it also leads to things like sheep groups and opinionated leaders and such things as that. Here are some symptoms of groupthink. So if you've ever been in a group and you've seen some of these, you've probably been a victim of groupthink. Basically, avoidance is where you create rationalizations to avoid dealing with warnings or threats. Let me give you a historical example. During World War II, before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the US had actually intercepted things saying that they were going to bomb it. But the people in charge over in Hawaii were like, nah, we don't believe it, we just, no. And they all collectively agreed that it was probably BS. Now, it turned out that it wasn't, but you can see how groupthink can get you into trouble in a situation where they were just trying to avoid dealing with something that possibly could happen, because the US thought, who would possibly attack us? Now, I might want to point out that this is about 5 out of 8 of the major ones. These are the ones that I found most relatable, so I thought that you all might be able to grasp these more, because these are the ones that I was able to grasp. And perhaps that's me using groupthink, but I digress. The assumption of morality. You basically believe that you and your group are in the right and nobody else is in the right, because your group is king, and this is how it's going to be done because we're right. The assumption of unanimity is assuming that everybody in the group thinks like you. So in groups with very opinionated leaders, that tends to be how it works. But the offset is in groups like sheep groups, it's just like, oh, he probably thinks the same, so I'm just going to do it anyway. And nobody really raises a difference of opinion. Peer pressure, pretty self-explanatory. I feel that everybody else is doing this, so I should probably do it myself. And finally, self-censorship. Well, I don't want to make a fuss, and I don't want to be looked at as that guy, so I'm just going to go with whatever everybody else is saying because it's easier. Which isn't necessarily a good thing. It's just actually not a good thing. So why is this important? I mean, I've talked about this horrible, evil group thing, but why is it important? Well, it deteriorates your mental efficiency. Basically, if a group is always just thinking the same, it's not going to come out with a great idea. It's going to take longer and come up with something that's really less quality, which really ties into the last one, which puts forth an inferior idea, because there is no difference, there is no creativity flowing. And that also leads to suppresses creativity. Because everybody's thinking the same way, nobody has the freedom to creatively think, to really get into the nitty-gritty and kind of come up with something novel. We also shut down logic in groupthink because there is no logic. There's the logic of the group and there is nothing else. So that's how that happens. And it increases stress because you're already in a high-stress environment. Not being able to voice your opinions because you feel the pressures of groupthink makes it so that you're just getting more and more stress. It doesn't alleviate the problem, it increases it. So, oh dear, what can we do? Luckily, there are solutions that have been thought out over time. And I think the best idea is, which is actually not the first one I put on the list, is the encouragement of vocalization. Basically say at the beginning of a meeting with a group, or just in a group in general, say, hey look, we're all equals here, we all have different ideas, express them, we gotta see what's gonna happen. Polling for ideas is when you say, alright, everybody raise your hand if you think that the idea to go to lunch after this is a great idea. You know, and everybody raise their hand and is like, okay, you didn't agree, why? What do you think we should do instead? Great, and that gets ideas flowing, it gets ideas bouncing around. Rewarding different opinions. When somebody says, actually, I don't really agree with that, say, great, why don't you agree with it? Tell us more, please explain. You know, make them so it's not like, oh, why aren't you agreeing with us? It's more, oh, great, we got some more opinions for them, we got great differences here. And go ahead and support creativity. It's something that you didn't even think of, just out of the blue. It's like, wow, that is a great comment, thank you so much for sharing. It really helps eliminate this groupthink and get such a much better idea going. So, I'm going to go back to 12 Angry Men. At the beginning, you saw that 5 or 6 people raised their hand immediately. Who saw that? Great. Now who noticed that slowly one person, then another two, then maybe the last person kind of raised their hand? Yeah? Now you can all identify that as groupthink. Now, interestingly enough, none of those jurors have names, because that's how the play was written, but the only one who disagrees is juror number 9, I believe. It's 9 or 10. And the rest of the movie is basically him persuading or expressing his point of view, breaking groupthink. And that's why I use that movie. It is such a good example. So basically, we've learned what groupthink is. It is when everybody in the group agrees out of pressure, out of a leader's sort of pressure. We understand, I believe, I hope. Where do we find groupthink? We have found it in all kinds of locations. Schools and workplaces are also included, by the way. Very important to know where it is. Symptoms of groupthink, how do we identify it? Why groupthink is important? So that we can get rid of it, and how do we overcome it? Also the strategies I just talked about. I thank you so much for listening, and I hope you all enjoyed the presentation. And here's some questions.